Picture this. You walk into the biggest room of your life. For professionals who have seen thousands of performers tell you, without hedging, that you did everything right. The audience is on its feet. The clips are already spreading across 3 continents before you've even left the stage. And then, a few hours later, you're told you finished 4th. That is exactly what happened to Mattie Juniosa on the night of May 30th, 2026, when the 19th series of Britain's Got Talent crowned its winner. And the explanation most people reached for that night, bias, a rigged vote, a celebrity conspiracy, misses what was actually going on. The real story is quieter than a conspiracy and, in a way, more interesting. A talent competition and a popularity contest were sharing the same stage, and only one of them was ever going to decide the winner. The Series 19 final aired live on ITV1 from the London Palladium. 10 acts performed for a £250,000 prize and a slot at the Royal Variety Performance. By the time the votes were counted, the result looked like this. The Hawkstone Farmers Choir, a 34-strong group of farmers and agricultural workers from Oxfordshire, took first place with 28.72% of the public vote. The drone display group Celestial finished second with 13.36%. The dog dancing duo Anastasia and Salsa placed third with 9.28%. And Mattie Juniosa, the only soloist in the series to receive 2 golden buzzers, came fourth with 9.16%, a gap of just over 1/10 of a percentage point between 3rd and 4th place. That margin matters, because it tells you this wasn't a landslide rejection. It was a photo finish that could easily have gone the other way, decided by a sliver of a percentage point in a national phone vote. Within minutes, the word "robbed" was trending on social media, with posts arriving simultaneously from the Philippines, the UK, the US, and across Southeast Asia. To understand why so many people reacted that strongly, and why the results still made structural sense, you have to understand both who Mattie Juniosa is and how the BGT final actually works. Mattie Juniosa was born and raised in Mandaluyong, part of Metro Manila in the Philippines, in a household steeped in music from an early age. He began performing as a young child and grew up idolizing singers known for vocal power and stage presence, the kind of artists whose influence shows up in how a performer holds a note, not just what they choose to sing. His path to a UK stage wasn't a straight line. In 2019, he competed on the first season of Idol Philippines and reached the later stages before being eliminated. He went on to become a member of a vocal group called Idols, releasing music through a major Philippine entertainment label. According to reporting from the Manila Bulletin, before his BGT breakthrough, he had already built a career as a working performer rather than an overnight discovery. In 2022, Juniosa relocated to Glasgow to study musical theatre at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, supporting himself with part-time work as a waiter while building a stage resume across Scottish theatre. His credits from that period include productions of Kinky Boots, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Oscar at the Crown, and Najah, according to the Manila Bulletin's account of his career. In other words, by the time he stepped onto the Britain's Got Talent stage in 2026, he wasn't a novice discovering performance for the first time on national television. He was a trained theatre professional whose talent competition run happened to be the moment the wider British public finally noticed him. Juniosa's audition aired on March 28, 2026. He performed a rendition of Prince's Purple Rain, reportedly chosen, in part, because it was known to be a favorite of Judge Simon Cowell. The judges responded with a standing ovation, and the performance connected strongly enough with the panel and the audience that Cowell pressed his golden buzzer, sending Juniosa directly to the live semi-finals without going through the earlier judging rounds. That single moment did more than advance him in the competition. Clips of the audition spread rapidly across the UK, the Philippines, and diaspora communities in the US, Canada, Australia, and the Middle East. For a contestant whose fanbase would eventually span multiple continents, this was the moment that fanbase started to form, well before the final had even been scheduled. Juniosa's semi-final performance came weeks later, when he closed his set with a cover of Aerosmith's Dream On. He received another standing ovation, with Judge Alicia Dixon offering strong praise for the vocal control and emotional delivery of the performance. Then Judge Amanda Holden used her own live golden buzzer to send him straight through to the final. making him only the fourth act in the show's history to receive 2 golden buzzers in a single series. What's worth noting here isn't just the achievement itself, but the reasoning behind it. A second golden buzzer is the show's highest possible form of endorsement from its professional panel. It exists precisely because the judges believe a performer's talent deserves to bypass the uncertainty of an ordinary vote. That a judge used it specifically to protect Juniosa from an early public vote, rather than simply to reward him, says something important about how the panel itself understood the gap between what they were seeing on stage and what the phone-voting public might ultimately reward. That gap would resurface, at a much larger scale, in the final itself. For the final, Juniosa performed Sinead O'Connor's ballad, Nothing Compares to You. By every account from that night, it was a technically accomplished and emotionally committed performance, earning a standing ovation from all 4 judges. Reporting from outlets including Philstar and the Manila Bulletin described it as one of the standout moments of the finale, and clips of the performance circulated widely online in the hours that followed. None of that translated into a top 3 finish. And this is the part of the story that tends to get flattened into a simple narrative of injustice, when the more accurate explanation is structural. The Britain's Got Talent final is decided by a public phone vote restricted to UK mobile numbers. Every act starts from 0 the moment the lines open. Prior golden buzzers, prior judge commentary, and prior viral moments carry no weight in the final tally. They exist to get a performer to the final stage, not to influence what happens once they're there. This isn't a secret rule. It's how the show has always operated. But its consequences are easy to underestimate until you see them play out against a specific case. Consider where Juniosa's most enthusiastic support was actually based. Filipino entertainment outlets had been covering his run since March. Diaspora communities across Southeast Asia, North America, Australia, and the Middle East have been sharing his clips and rallying around his story for months, and that enthusiasm was genuine and substantial. But a UK mobile-only voting system means none of that international audience, however large or however devoted, could actually cast a vote. A fan base spread across multiple continents, no matter how loud, simply doesn't register in a system built around domestic phone numbers. Now compare that to the winning act. The Hawkstone Farmers Choir drew its 34 members from farming and agricultural communities in and around Chadlington, Oxfordshire, all rooted within the UK. According to Wikipedia's account of the series, the choir was formed to support the mental health of farming communities, giving their run on the show a community identity dimension that went beyond vocal performance alone, one that resonated with a UK voting base built entirely around domestic engagement. That's not a criticism of the choir's win, it's a description of exactly the kind of support base a UK-only phone vote is built to reward. This is the core of what actually happened on May 30th. Juniosa didn't lose because he was outperformed. He lost because the format that decides the final measures something different from the format that decides who reaches the final, and by the time viewers realized that distinction mattered, the votes were already being counted. None of that context makes the online reaction any less real. The robbed narrative that spread within minutes of the results wasn't a small pocket of disappointed fans. It was a coordinated, near-simultaneous wave of posts from multiple countries, driven by an audience that had followed Juniosa's run closely enough to feel personally invested in the outcome. Some of that reaction spilled into speculation about the winning choir's connections, notably to television presenter and farmer Jeremy Clarkson, who had helped establish the choir in 2024 to support farming communities near his Oxfordshire estate and who was visibly emotional in the audience when the result was announced. Various claims circulated online about vote-related incentives tied to his fanbase. None of those claims have been independently verified by credible reporting, and treating them as established fact would distract from the more grounded explanation. A UK-only phone vote will naturally favor an act with deep, geographically concentrated UK community ties over an act whose loudest support lives outside the country's borders. Clarkson's presence and profile likely mobilized an already engaged domestic audience. That's a far more mundane and far more verifiable explanation than an orchestrated scheme. Here's the detail that puts the whole story in a different light. A month before the BGT final aired, the official casting announcement for Andrew Lloyd Webber's West End revival of Jesus Christ Superstar at the London Palladium listed Matty Juniosa's stage name, in the role of Anna's part of a production scheduled to run from June 20th through September 5th, 2026. That means professional theater producers, casting directors, and musical supervisors had already evaluated Juniosa's ability, committed real money to a multi-month production, and cast him in a West End role weeks before the British public picked up their phones to vote in the BGT final. Those decisions rest on a completely different kind of judgment than a 2-hour Saturday night phone vote, one based on sustained professional assessment rather than a single night's emotional response. And that judgment reached its own, entirely separate verdict on Juniosa's talent before the show's audience ever weighed in. In the aftermath, Juniosa posted on Instagram that he'd finished 4th on Beyoncé's birthday and said he was proud of that. He also credited the experience with giving him the drive to take on the Jesus Christ superstar role. It's a small detail, but a telling one. A performer holding a West End contract in one hand doesn't frame a 4th-place finish as the end of the story, because for him, structurally, it wasn't. It's worth sitting with those vote percentages a little longer, because they tell a more precise story than a simple ranking does. A 0.12 percentage point gap between Juniosa in 4th and Anastasia and Salsa in 3rd is not the kind of margin that points to an act being decisively out-talented. In a national phone vote involving millions of calls and texts, a gap that small is closer to a coin flip than a verdict. It means that on a different night, with a slightly different mood in the room, or a slightly different lead-in on the broadcast schedule, the order of 3rd and 4th could plausibly have flipped. Compare that narrow margin to the gap at the top of the leaderboard. The Hawkstone Farmers Choir won with 28.72%, more than double the vote share of the second-place act. That's not a narrow win, it's a commanding one. And the size of that gap is itself informative. It suggests the choir's win wasn't the product of a marginal shift in sentiment on the night. It reflects a voting base that was unusually large, unusually motivated, and unusually concentrated within the pool of people eligible to vote at all. A choir built from 34 individuals, each with their own family, workplace, and community network across British farming regions, has a fundamentally different vote-generating structure than a solo performer, however beloved, whose support network is spread across several time zones and several countries that can't participate in the vote at all. It would be easy to read this story as evidence that the judges, or the show's producers, favored one act over another. But nothing in the record supports that reading, and it isn't really necessary to explain what happened. The judge's own on-air behavior points the other way. Amanda Holden used her golden buzzer specifically to shield Juniosa from an early public vote she suspected he might lose, which is the opposite of a panel trying to work against him. Simon Cowell's golden buzzer for the Purple Rain audition and the judge's unanimous praise throughout the final all suggest a panel that rated Juniosa's talent extremely highly and said so, repeatedly, on camera. The more accurate reading is that the show's format simply contains two different selection mechanisms operating on two different scales, and nobody involved, not the judges, not the producers, not Juniosa himself, has full control over which one determines the outcome once the final begins. The audition and semi-final rounds are curated by expert judgment. The final is decided by whichever act can generate the largest, most concentrated response from a specific, geographically bounded audience in a 2-hour live broadcast. Those are structurally different contests, even though they share a stage, a set of hosts, and a scoreboard that makes them look like one continuous competition. There's a broader pattern here that extends well beyond this one series. Reality competition formats built around a domestic phone or text vote were largely designed decades ago, in an era when a show's fan base was assumed to live almost entirely within the broadcasting country. Britain's Got Talent, like many similar formats around the world, still operates on that assumption, even though its content now travels globally within hours of airing thanks to clip culture and social media. Juniosa's run is a clear illustration of what happens when a contestant's actual audience outgrows that assumption. His clips were picked up by entertainment outlets across the Philippines and by diaspora communities throughout Southeast Asia, North America, and the Middle East almost as soon as they aired. That international attention very likely made him one of the most discussed acts of the series, measured by total online engagement. But total online engagement and eligible vote count are two completely different metrics, and only one of them decides who lifts the trophy. A performer can dominate global conversation and still lose a UK-only vote to an act with a smaller total following, provided that smaller following is entirely domestic and highly motivated to pick up the phone. Step back from Juniosa's individual case, and the pattern becomes a useful lens for understanding talent shows in general. The audition and semi-final rounds of Britain's Got Talent are genuinely built to identify performance ability. That's the phase where golden buzzers exist to fast-track the acts judges believe are exceptional. But the final operates on a different axis entirely. It measures which act can mobilize the largest concentrated, geographically eligible voting base in a short window. Those two things frequently overlap. They don't always. That distinction isn't unique to BGT. Any competition format that combines expert evaluation with public voting eventually runs into the same tension. Technical excellence and voter mobilization are correlated, but they aren't the same variable, and formats that reset everything to zero for a single live vote will always leave room for a gap between the two. Juniosa's fourth-place finish is simply an unusually clean, unusually well-documented example of that gap in action. So was Mattie Juniosa robbed? By the standard of pure vocal and performance talent, judged the way the show's own panel judged him for 4 straight rounds, the answer looks like a clear no. He was one of the strongest acts in the series, arguably the strongest soloist, and he's since gone on to a West End role that the industry had already signed off on before the final vote closed. By the standard the final actually applies, who can turn out the largest domestic voting base in a 2-hour window, the numbers explain themselves without needing a conspiracy. Maybe the more useful question isn't whether the judges got it right. It's whether a national phone vote is still the fairest way to close out a competition that spends its early rounds rewarding something the final round doesn't measure at all. What do you think? Should Britain's Got Talent change how the final vote works, or is a public vote still the right way to crown a winner?